Some invitations aren't meant to be accepted, they're meant to end something. Emily Carter whispered as the envelope hit the marble counter, the sound sharp in the quiet apartment like a verdict she never asked for, and for a moment she didn't touch it, didn't breathe, because deep down she already knew who it was from. The cream paper was expensive, the kind Daniel Whitmore used for everything that mattered, contracts, announcements, the life he had built without her, and when she finally slid her finger under the seal, the edge caught her skin just enough to sting, a thin red line appearing as if her body understood before her mind did. Daniel Whitmore and Vanessa Blake request the honor of your presence. The words gleamed in gold, elegant, effortless, cruel in their simplicity. And then the date, her birthday, the same day she had once spent blowing out candles beside him in a penthouse overlooking the Hudson. The same day he had kissed her forehead and promised forever, a promise that now felt like it belonged to someone else's life. Emily stood there, one hand slowly drifting to her stomach where 6 months of quiet strength grew beneath her palm, the steady reminder that not everything had been taken, not everything had been erased, even if Daniel had signed the papers in a private hospital room like it was just another deal, even if he had looked at her not with anger or guilt but with something colder. Something final, like she no longer fit into the version of success he wanted the world to see. Outside, the city moved on without noticing, taxis honking, people rushing, sunlight reflecting off glass towers that once felt like home, and somewhere across that skyline Daniel was celebrating, already stepping into a future that didn't include her, already rewriting the story as if she had been a temporary chapter, something disposable, something replaceable. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly see from his side of the world, was that Emily had stopped breaking the moment the envelope touched her hand, that something inside her had shifted, quiet but absolute, like a door closing and another one unlocking at the same time. She read the note again, slower now, letting each word settle, letting the insult sharpen instead of soften. No hard feelings, it said, as if dismissal could be polite, as if erasing someone's life could come wrapped in courtesy, and for a second, just a second, the old Emily might have folded, might have disappeared, might have let this be the final line. But this time, she didn't look away, she didn't crumble, she simply reached for her phone. The screen lighting up with a name she hadn't answered yet, a name tied to a different path, a different truth, one Daniel had never bothered to discover, and as her reflection stared back at her from the dark glass, calmer than it had any right to be, Emily Carter made a decision that would turn an invitation into a reckoning. Because she wasn't going to that wedding as a guest, she was going as the ending he never saw coming. Emily sat back on the couch, the silence of the apartment heavy around her, each breath slower than the last as she turned the invitation over in her hands. She had known this moment was coming, had sensed it when Daniel's calls started to slow, when his smiles grew more rehearsed, when his touch felt like it was only a reminder of something fading, but seeing it all written out, so cold and formal, was something else entirely. The sting of his words echoed in her mind again, "You're not suitable anymore." But that was his way, wasn't it? To make someone else the problem when he was the one doing everything wrong. He always had a way of twisting the narrative, bending it to fit his perfect image, but this time it was different. Emily wasn't broken. Not anymore. She placed the invitation down on the table, the glossy surface reflecting the sharp edges of the paper. She didn't even have to think about it. She knew what she had to do. The truth was, she had been ready for this for a long time. She had always known that deep down, Daniel wasn't who she thought he was. He never was. Their love had been nothing more than a construct, a facade built around the idea of success. He had chosen the easy path, the one that led to wealth and public approval, and left her standing in the ashes of what could have been. It had always been about his empire, his business, his name, his reputation. And now, here he was, marrying someone else as if she were just a footnote in his history. Emily's hand brushed over her stomach, the gentle reminder of the life growing inside her, a life that would never be part of his perfect world. This baby, these twins, were her future, not his. She had loved Daniel once, loved him with every ounce of her being, but he had destroyed that love long ago, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the cold, sharp edges of betrayal. She thought about the years she had spent supporting him, lifting him up when no one else would. She had been the one to push him forward, the one to pick up the pieces when he faltered. And now, when she needed him, when she was vulnerable, he had cast her aside like she was nothing. She reached for her phone, dialing the number she had hesitated to call for so long. Julian. She had met him a year ago, just a few months after everything fell apart with Daniel. At first, it had just been a friendship, a quiet support when she had no one else. But as time passed, something changed. Julian wasn't like Daniel. He wasn't looking for anything from her, not like the others. He didn't want her for her wealth or her beauty. He wanted her for who she was. And for the first time in years, Emily felt like she could breathe again. She needed to talk to him. She needed his help. She needed someone who saw her for who she truly was, not just as an accessory to someone else's success. She pressed the call button, holding her breath as the phone rang. "Hey, Emily," Julian's voice came through the line, steady and warm. "What's going on?" "I need to talk," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "It's about Daniel." Julian's tone shifted, a quiet understanding in his voice. "What happened?" "He's getting married," Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. "To her. To Vanessa. He invited me to the wedding. On my birthday." Julian was silent for a moment, processing the words. "I'm coming over," he said finally. "We'll figure this out together." Emily hung up the phone and stood up, her reflection in the window staring back at her. She didn't recognize the woman she saw, but in a way, she wasn't sure she wanted to anymore. The woman in the glass was someone stronger, someone who could walk away from this life and leave Daniel behind. The woman she saw in the reflection was someone who would never let herself be broken again. She walked to her closet, pulling out a simple dress that made her feel powerful, the same one she had worn years ago when she first met Daniel. It was a reminder of who she had been before, and it was time to remember that woman. She wasn't going to the wedding as the broken woman Daniel thought she was. She was going as the woman who would take back everything he had stolen. She was going to make him see what he had lost. She was going to make him regret ever letting her go. The plan was simple. She would show up. She would let him watch as his perfect world crumbled, as his lies came to light. She wasn't going to let him hide behind the mask of perfection anymore. She would take it all back, one step at a time. She took one last look in the mirror, her heart steady now, her purpose clear. She wasn't afraid of what would happen next. She was ready. Emily sat in the back of the sleek black car, staring out of the tinted window at the city passing by in blurred lights. The streets seemed to move faster than her thoughts, but she could feel the weight of the invitation in her purse, pressing against her side like a reminder that this moment was coming, whether she was ready for it or not. Her fingers drummed against her phone, wondering if she should call Julian again, but she stopped herself. She didn't need his reassurance anymore. She didn't need anyone to tell her she was doing the right thing. This was hers to face, hers to own, and when she walked through those doors, she would do so on her own terms. The thought of Daniel waiting for her, smiling at her as if nothing had ever changed between them, twisted something inside her. He was so confident, so sure that he had everything figured out. But Emily knew better. She knew what he had forgotten. He had forgotten that Emily Carter was not someone to be underestimated, not someone to be cast aside without consequence. She glanced at her reflection in the dark window, surprised by how calm she looked. It was almost as if the woman staring back at her wasn't the one who had been left behind, wasn't the one who had been betrayed. No, this woman had power in her eyes, a quiet strength that wasn't born from revenge, but from something far more lasting, self-respect. The car stopped in front of the venue, a grand mansion lit up like something out of a fairy tale. Emily's hand tightened around the purse strap as she stepped out, her heels clicking against the pavement. She had made her decision. She wasn't here to cause a scene. She wasn't here to ruin Daniel's day. She was here to show him the truth he had been blind to. She moved through the entrance, the sound of chatter and clinking glasses filling the air, but it all felt distant. She could see the glimmer of the stage in the distance, could feel the spotlight of their world, but it wasn't hers. Not anymore. She was an outsider, standing on the edge of a story she had once been a part of. She spotted Daniel almost immediately, standing with Vanessa at the center of the room. He was the picture of perfection, dressed in a tailored suit, his arm draped over Vanessa's waist. The smile on his face was the one she had once known so well, but there was no recognition in his eyes when he turned toward her. Vanessa, on the other hand, caught her gaze almost instantly. The woman's lips curled into a thin, almost smug smile, but Emily saw the flicker of something else in her eyes, nervousness. Perhaps she had heard the whispers, perhaps she had seen Emily's name on the invitation list, and now she was wondering what this quiet woman was doing here. Emily walked toward them, her steps deliberate, unhurried. She was not nervous. She was not afraid. She was done with hiding. When Daniel saw her, his smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, but he quickly recovered, his voice smooth and cordial. "Emily," he said, his tone polite but distant, as if she were just another guest. "I'm glad you could make it." Emily stood before them, her heart steady, her hands clasped in front of her. She didn't return his smile. "I wouldn't have missed it," she said, her voice cool, but not without its edge. "Congratulations." Vanessa's smile widened, but there was something forced about it. "It's so good to see you here, Emily. I'm sure you're glad Daniel found someone who truly appreciates him." Emily looked at Vanessa, her eyes not as cold as she had meant them to be. She didn't need to waste any more time on her. Her attention shifted back to Daniel. "You've done well for yourself," she said softly, as if they were discussing business, not a broken marriage. "But you've forgotten one thing, Daniel. You never really knew me." Daniel blinked, confusion flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper, the confusion turning into something darker. "I know you." Emily smiled, just barely. "No, you don't. You never did." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small stack of papers. The sound of rustling was loud enough to cut through the hum of the conversation around them. Daniel's eyes flickered to the papers, his expression changing to one of discomfort. Vanessa's smile faded. Emily's fingers traced the edges of the papers before she held them out for him to see. "This," she said, "is what you missed. This is what you'll never get back." She could feel the shift in the room, the sudden tension that filled the space between them. Daniel stared at the papers, his face paling, his hands twitching at his sides. Vanessa looked from Emily to Daniel, confusion written across her face. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice quivering. Emily didn't answer her. She didn't need to. Daniel had already seen it, the truth that would undo everything he thought he had. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. And as the guests continued to chat and laugh around them, Emily stood taller, a quiet strength flowing through her as she walked away, leaving Daniel behind, just as he had left her. She wasn't running. She was simply moving on. Emily sat alone in the park, the evening sun casting long shadows over the path in front of her. The city buzzed in the distance, but here, in this quiet moment, everything felt far away. Her mind raced back to the night of the wedding, when she had walked away from Daniel, her heart heavy with the weight of everything she had just exposed. She had not stayed to watch him crumble, to see the regret in his eyes, or the fury in Vanessa's. No, she had left because this was not about him anymore. This was about her. The papers she had given him, the ones that had shattered his world in front of everyone, had been nothing more than the first step. The truth had been in her hands for a long time, hidden beneath the surface of her calm exterior, and it was time for it to be seen. She had spent so many years living in the shadows of Daniel's life, sacrificing herself for the sake of his success, his dreams, his future, but no more. She was done. Her thoughts drifted to Julian, the quiet man who had been there for her, the one who had never asked for anything but her trust. When she had called him that night, she hadn't known what to expect, but his voice had been steady, calm, and sure. I'm coming over, he had said. We'll figure this out together. And he had. Julian had been more than just a friend. He had been the one person who had shown her that she could still have a life beyond the betrayal. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, letting the memory of his presence wash over her. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was something real, something that made her believe she could trust again. She stood up, her body tired but steady, and walked toward the exit of the park, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from Julian. We need to talk. I think it's time for you to take control of everything. The words sent a thrill through her. Julian had been the one to see her as more than just a victim. He had been the one to help her see that her life wasn't over, that there was more waiting for her. She had always been strong, even when she hadn't known it. As she walked down the street, heading toward the meeting place, Julian had suggested, her mind began to form a plan. She wasn't going to let Daniel walk away without facing the consequences of his actions. She wasn't going to let him move on with his life as if everything was fine. No. She was going to take back what was hers, and she was going to do it in a way that he would never forget. She had spent so many years watching him, supporting him, but now it was her turn. She didn't need him anymore. The world was full of opportunities, and she would find her own way, with or without him. Her steps quickened as she approached the cafe where Julian was waiting. He looked up as she entered, his eyes soft with concern, but she could see the admiration in them too. He had been waiting for this moment, just as much as she had. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady. It's time to take control. Julian nodded, standing up to meet her. Let's do this, he said, his smile a quiet reassurance that everything was going to be all right. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt like she could breathe, like she could finally step into the light. The past was behind her, and the future was hers to shape. She didn't need to be anyone else's shadow anymore. She was Emily Carter, and she was going to make her own destiny. Emily walked into the dimly lit cafe, the familiar warmth of its interior offering a sharp contrast to the cool, crisp night air outside. The sound of a coffee grinder whirring and the faint hum of quiet conversations filled the space, but it was Julian's presence that anchored her. He was sitting at the corner table, a coffee cup in front of him, his focus on something he was writing, but the moment he looked up, his eyes softened, his expression unreadable but calm. She had been coming here for months now, each visit with him a step further away from the life she had once known, from the woman who had been forgotten by a man who claimed to love her. But that woman, the one who had lived for others, had already faded. She was no longer the same. Julian smiled when he saw her, a quiet reassurance, but it was his eyes that held the most. Power, like he saw something in her that even she hadn't fully realized yet. You look different, he said, his voice low but warm. Stronger. Emily couldn't help but smile back. She had spent so many years trying to please Daniel, trying to hold everything together, but now, in this moment, she could finally feel it. The shift. I am different, she replied, her voice steady. She sat across from him, pulling the small stack of papers from her bag, placing them in front of him. This is everything I need. This is the way forward. Julian's eyes flickered to the papers, his fingers brushing over them carefully, but he didn't speak at first. There was no need for words. Emily had been waiting for this moment, for this plan to come together, and now it was finally time. Are you sure you're ready for this? Julian asked, his voice careful, like he was asking more than just about the papers in front of them. Emily looked him in the eye, and for the first time, she didn't hesitate. I'm ready. She had spent so long hiding behind the idea of what she should be. But now, she was stepping into the woman she was always meant to be. Let's finish this. Julian nodded, his fingers tracing the edges of the papers before sliding them toward him. They weren't just documents, they were the keys to her future. Keys that Daniel had never bothered to see. As Julian went over the details, explaining the steps they would take, Emily's mind wandered back to the wedding, to the moment when Daniel had looked at her with no recognition, no guilt, only the coldness of a man who had moved on. But it wasn't her fault. She wasn't the one who had given up on love. He had. "We're not doing this to hurt him," Julian said, breaking her thoughts. "We're doing this to make sure you get what you deserve." She looked at him, the weight of his words settling in. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. "I know," Emily replied softly. "I'm not here to hurt him. I'm here to get back what was taken from me." Julian's eyes softened, and for a moment she could see the care he had for her in that quiet look. He didn't need to say anything else. The decision had been made. The plan was in motion. The life she had once shared with Daniel was gone, and it wasn't coming back. The only thing left to do was to move forward. Emily left the cafe, the weight of the papers still in her bag, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like power, like control over her own destiny. She wasn't going to stand on the sidelines of her own life anymore. She wasn't going to be the woman Daniel had tried to erase. She was going to take what was hers, with or without his approval. She would no longer be a shadow of his success. She would create her own. And as she walked through the streets, her steps steady and sure, she realized that the future she was stepping into was one where she wasn't afraid to fight for herself. She didn't need anyone's permission. She didn't need Daniel's validation. She only needed herself. And that was all she ever needed. Emily stood in front of the grand building, her heart pounding as she stared up at the tall glass doors. The day had come. The final step. The last piece of the puzzle. She had spent so many years fighting for a life that Daniel had promised her, and now, in this moment, she was about to take everything back. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't unsure. This wasn't the woman who had once begged for a second chance, who had pleaded for love. No, this was the woman who had learned to survive on her own terms, who had found strength in the silence of her solitude. She walked through the doors, the sound of her heels clicking against the marble floor echoing in the massive lobby. The building was luxurious, filled with high-end decorations and gold accents, but it was all just background noise now. None of it mattered. What mattered was the moment she had been waiting for. She could feel the weight of the papers in her purse, the proof she had gathered, the secrets she had uncovered. It wasn't just about exposing Daniel anymore. It was about reclaiming herself. She walked confidently to the elevator, the doors opening automatically as she approached. She stepped inside, her reflection in the polished metal reminding her of how far she had come. The woman who had once cowered in fear, the one who had let her life be dictated by someone else's dreams, no longer existed. She had become someone new, someone who was ready to take back what was hers. The elevator doors slid open, and Emily stepped out into the penthouse floor. The door to Daniel's office was wide open, and she could hear voices coming from inside. She paused for a moment, her fingers tightening around her purse, before walking toward the door. She wasn't here to waste time. She wasn't here to ask for permission. She had everything she needed. She stepped inside without knocking. Daniel looked up in surprise, his face briefly registering confusion before it hardened into something she had come to expect. "Emily," he said, his voice tight with the realization that she was here for something far more than a simple visit. "What are you doing here?" Emily didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced over at Vanessa, who was standing beside Daniel, her eyes narrowing as she took in the situation. There was no fear in Emily's eyes, only clarity. She didn't have to explain herself anymore. "I'm here for what's mine," Emily said, her voice steady. Daniel's face shifted slightly, disbelief mixing with annoyance. "You don't have any claim to anything here. You're nothing." The words stung, but Emily didn't flinch. "I used to believe that," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "But I'm not here to beg, Daniel. I'm here to take what's rightfully mine." She reached into her purse and pulled out the papers. She didn't give them to him immediately. She let the silence stretch between them, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably but didn't speak. She knew what was coming. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed unaware of the storm brewing in front of him. Emily placed the papers on the desk between them, This is where it ends, she said, her eyes never leaving Daniel's. The lies, the betrayal. It all ends now. Daniel picked up the papers, his expression faltering as he skimmed the contents. The color drained from his face as he read, his hand shaking slightly. Vanessa stepped closer, her voice dripping with disbelief. What is this? What are you trying to do? Emily looked at her, her gaze cold. I'm not trying to do anything. This is what happens when you think you can walk all over people without consequences. She turned back to Daniel, who had gone silent, his face pale. You thought you could erase me. You thought you could replace me. But you can't. Daniel dropped the papers onto the desk, his expression hardening as his anger bubbled to the surface. You're not going to get away with this. He spat, his voice low and dangerous. Emily stood her ground, her heart steady. You don't have the power to stop me anymore. You lost that when you walked away. She paused, letting her words sink in. And now, it's time for you to face the consequences of your actions. She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, she heard his voice again. You'll regret this, Daniel called out, his tone venomous. Emily stopped but didn't turn around. She took a deep breath, feeling the finality of the moment. No, Daniel, she said quietly, without turning around. You're the one who's going to regret this. She walked out of the office, leaving behind the man who had once been her world, a man who no longer held any power over her. As the elevator doors closed, Emily felt a weight lift off her shoulders. This was her victory, her moment. She had done it. She had taken control. And there was no turning back now. The phone buzzed in her hand, pulling Emily out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, her breath catching in her throat for a split second. It was from Julian. Are you free? I have news. Her finger hovered over the screen, the words heavy in her mind. She had just walked away from Daniel's empire, leaving him with nothing but the shattered remains of his own decisions. And now, Julian was reaching out. She quickly typed back. I'm on my way. It wasn't hard to find Julian's office. It was a quiet part of the city, tucked away from the bustle, a place where decisions were made without the glare of public eyes. As she stepped out of the car, the weight of the day settled on her shoulders. There was no turning back now. She had already done everything she needed to do. She had confronted Daniel, shown him the truth, and walked away. She had taken back the control she had long lost, but she wasn't finished yet. There was still one more step to take. She entered the building and made her way to the elevator, her heels clicking softly on the polished floors. As she approached Julian's office, she could already sense something was different. The air felt thicker, more charged, as if something was about to change, something bigger than she could have anticipated. Julian was waiting for her when she walked in. He stood by the window, his back to her, but as she entered, he turned around and greeted her with a smile. I wasn't sure if you'd come, he said, his voice carrying a note of surprise. Emily simply nodded, not needing to say much. She had known, from the moment she walked out of Daniel's life, that she was ready for whatever came next. She had found herself, and now, there was nothing left to fear. You don't have to be nervous, Julian said, sensing her stillness. This is it. This is the last part of the plan. She nodded again, this time more determined. I'm ready. Julian gestured toward the table, where a set of papers lay neatly stacked. She knew what they were. This was the last part, the final documents that would secure her future and free her from Daniel's grasp once and for all. These are the final steps, Julian explained, his voice steady but filled with an underlying excitement. Once you sign these, it's all over. There's no going back. Emily reached for the papers, her fingers brushing the edges of the smooth sheets. This was it. She wasn't scared. She wasn't unsure. She was taking control, once and for all. As she signed the documents, she couldn't help but feel a rush of freedom, of weight being lifted from her shoulders. She had done it. She had taken back everything. As she looked up from the papers, she saw Julian watching her with quiet admiration. You did it, he said softly. You really did it. She smiled, a smile that was more for herself than for him. I had to. It was the only way to move forward. Julian stepped closer, his presence a quiet reassurance. You're not alone, Emily. You never were. She felt the warmth of his words, but she also knew that this was her victory, her moment. She had walked away from a life that had never truly been hers, and now she was free. Thank you, she said, her voice quiet but sincere. For everything. Julian nodded, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. It's only just begun. She stepped away from the table, her eyes scanning the office one last time. The city outside seemed different now, brighter somehow, as if it too knew that Emily was finally free. As she walked toward the door, her heart light and her steps steady, she realized that this was the beginning of something new, something she had never imagined. She was ready for whatever came next. And for the first time in a long time, she was not afraid. Emily stood at the edge of the rooftop, her eyes staring out at the sprawling city below. The lights flickered like stars in the distance, but the weight of everything she had gone through still lingered in the air. It was as if the world had shifted beneath her feet, and she was standing at the precipice of something new. A year ago, she never would have imagined she would be here, not in this moment, not in this place. But here she was, finally free. The papers she had signed, the decisions she had made, they were all a testament to how far she had come. She wasn't the same woman who had stood in that courtroom, fighting to be seen, to be heard. She was no longer the wife who had lived in the shadows of a man's success. She was Emily Carter, and she had taken back everything that had been taken from her. The wind tugged at her hair as she pulled her coat tighter around her body, the cool evening air a reminder that everything had changed. She was no longer living for anyone else. She was living for herself. And that was something she had never done before. The sound of footsteps behind her made her turn, and there stood Julian, his presence calm and steady, as always. You okay? He asked, his voice soft but full of understanding. Emily smiled, the weight of the world suddenly feeling lighter. Yeah, she said, her voice steady. I'm just taking it all in. Julian stepped closer, his gaze following hers as he looked out at the city. It's a lot to take in, isn't it? He said, his tone thoughtful. All of this. Emily nodded. It's everything I thought I wanted, she said, her voice softening. And then I realized, it's not about what I wanted. It's about what I needed. Julian's eyes shifted to meet hers, a quiet understanding passing between them. And what do you need now? He asked gently. Emily took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs. She wasn't sure how to put it into words, but for the first time, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. I need to build my own life, she said slowly, each word heavy with meaning. I need to do things for me. I've spent so many years building someone else's dream, living in their world. But now I'm going to live for myself. Julian smiled, his expression warm. I think you're going to do great things, Emily, he said, his voice filled with genuine belief. Emily met his gaze, feeling a surge of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Thank you, she said quietly. For everything. For helping me see that I could be more than just a reflection of someone else. Julian's smile grew, and he nodded. You've always been more than that, he said. You just needed to see it for yourself. Emily looked out at the city once more, the lights reflecting off the glass windows, creating a sea of golden sparks below. It was a new beginning, and she was ready for it. She didn't need validation. She didn't need permission. She just needed to take that first step, and she had already done that. She had left behind the woman who had once believed that her worth was tied to someone else's approval, and in doing so, she had freed herself. It's not going to be easy, she said softly, turning back to Julian. But I'm ready. Julian's smile was the only answer she needed. Then let's get started, he said, his voice filled with a quiet optimism. Emily nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. For the first time in a long time, She knew who she was. And that was enough. She was going to build her own future, her own path, and nothing was going to stand in her way. The city stretched out before her, full of endless possibilities, and she was ready to seize them all. With Julian by her side, she wasn't just stepping into the future, she was stepping into her own power. And nothing could take that from her. Emily sat at her desk, the soft glow of the lamp casting a warm light over the pages in front of her. The world outside the window was quiet, the city a distant hum of life, but here, in this small office, she was at peace. She had come so far from where she once was. The woman who had once been lost in the shadows of a marriage, the woman who had lived for someone else's success, had finally stepped into the light. Now, she was creating her own path, and it felt like the first breath after a lifetime of holding it in. Julian's words echoed in her mind, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. "You're going to do great things," he had said. And she believed it. She believed in herself. Emily picked up the pen, the weight of it familiar in her hand. The papers before her were the final step in the new life she was building. The contracts, the business deals, the plans, everything was coming together. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. A knock on the door brought her back to the present. She looked up, her heart skipping a beat when she saw Julian standing in the doorway, his face warm with that same quiet understanding. "Mind if I come in?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with something unspoken. Emily smiled, gesturing for him to enter. "Of course," she replied. As he walked in, he glanced around the room, taking in the quiet space that had become hers. "It's strange, isn't it?" he said after a moment. "Seeing you here, in this space, so in control." Emily leaned back in her chair, her fingers still lightly holding the pen. "It doesn't feel strange," she said softly. "It feels right." Julian's gaze met hers, and for a moment they just stood there, the silence between them comfortable, as if they both understood the weight of the moment. "You've worked hard for this," he said, stepping closer. "You've fought for it." Emily nodded. "I have. And I'm not stopping now." She set the pen down, the final signature completed. She had done it. She had built something of her own, something that wasn't dependent on anyone else's success or approval. It was hers, and that made all the difference. "It's done," she said quietly, her voice full of satisfaction. "It's really done." Julian smiled, his expression softening. "I knew you could do it." Emily's heart swelled at his words, but she knew deep down that this was her victory. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady but filled with gratitude. "For believing in me." Julian's smile deepened, and he stepped closer, standing beside her. "I always knew you had it in you," he said quietly. "You just had to see it for yourself." Emily looked out the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance, but it wasn't the city she saw. It was her future that she had built with her own hands, with her own strength. She wasn't waiting for anyone to validate her anymore. She had found her own worth, and it was enough. "What now?" she asked, turning her gaze back to him. Julian paused, his eyes thoughtful. "Now?" he repeated, his voice warm. "Now we move forward. Together." Emily felt a spark of excitement race through her. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving. She was living, and the world was full of possibilities. She smiled, the weight of everything finally lifting from her shoulders. "Together," she agreed, the word feeling like a promise. As she sat there, in the quiet of her office, the papers signed and the future ahead of her, Emily realized that she had become the woman she was always meant to be. And nothing, not even the ghosts of her past, could take that away from her.